Hey everyone, this is my review of the Thinkpad T14 Generation 3 as promised. It's been about 1 month and I have to say right off the bat that it has been a pleasure owning this device. It's meant to be a portable workstation for me, just traveling around and just doing some basic engineering tasks. It's a secondary device to my desktop PC which I have at home, so I don't need the absolute most powerful device to do that. But I will say right off the bat, it does everything well that any ThinkPad needs to do well. The keyboard is slightly reduced in travel relative to the last ThinkPad I've owned, but once I've gotten used to the lower travel, it's amazing. They've kept all of that going great. The track point I still don't really use, but that's okay. The touchpad is incredibly accurate, very slick, very Apple-like. And I have zero complaints about the trackpad. Would have maybe liked physical left and right click buttons, but that's a minor issue. And on top of the keyboard deck, new for Generation 3 is the fingerprint reader that is integrated into the power button. It's very okay. It can miss your fingerprint if you do it slightly off, but most of the time it works just fine. It's very quick. And I have really no real complaints about the fingerprint reader. This computer is basically running an AMD Ryzen 6650U processor, 16 gigs of LPDDR5 RAM, clocked at 6400 megahertz. It's got a 512 gigabyte PCI Gen 4 SSD, and basically a 3-cell 39.3 watt hour battery, and a 16 by 10 screen, 1920 by 1200 screen that is 300 nits of brightness. Now in terms of the screen, I have to say that it's a very decent screen. It's not going to win any awards for colors, because in my last comparison with the MacBook Air, the M2 version, the MacBook wiped the floor in terms of color reproduction and black levels compared to this, but I kind of knew I was leaving the display on the table. But I will say it's a very decent display. There are certain colors it is lacking in, particularly reds and greens, but it certainly does the job for basic engineering work. If you're into photography or digital content creation, I would highly recommend that you upgrade to the HDR 400 screen with, the 100% or so Adobe RGB color gamut. So that's a must. But overall, it's an okay screen with decent black levels. Now let's move on to the ports. So in terms of ports, there's an Ethernet port, which I don't use very often. This is a USB Type-C 3.2 port, not Type 4 Thunderbolt/Thunderbolt. We're going to get to that in a second. That one's a regular USB-C 3.2. This one has power delivery, this one does not. Then HDMI, just for plugging into monitors and TVs, which I use frequently. One USB Type A, 3.1 I believe, and a headphone jack with microphone in. Now going back to this, one of my subscribers asked me the question, does this support Thunderbolt 4 or USB-C version 4? And it does not. For whatever reason, Lenovo thought that they could get away with just putting in USB 3.2. So if you do want it, you're gonna have to get the ThinkPad T14S Gen 3 to get that. And that one's a little bit lighter, just a little bit better in a few ways, but you're gonna pay a little bit more, and I did not at all need Thunderbolt or the ability to plug in an external GPU. But if that is you, then you should absolutely get the T14S and get the USB Type 4. Now over on the other side, we have an empty smart card reader. You can get this if you work for corporations or a government usually. We got an exhaust over here. We got USB Type A and one Kensington lock out. And on the very back of it, you basically have a SIM card if you are, always in the need of 4G on the go. Another thing I want to say is how thin and light this machine is. At 2.65 pounds, it's super light, and it's starting to tread on X1 Carbon territory. And apparently the X1 Carbon is an Intel only model, so you're never gonna get AMD Ryzen like we have on here. And Lenovo also recently released their Z13 and Z16, which is an interesting new line that's more trendy, probably aimed more at MacBook users. But what I don't like about that, and what a lot of business users, engineers would probably need, is more ports. They only really give you USB Type-C ports and headphone jack, and to me that's sort of not acceptable. But if you're totally fine carrying around a dongle with you, that's what you want to do. I also need to mention that the build quality on this ThinkPad is excellent. There were complaints about Gen 1 and Gen 2 of the ThinkPad T14, but I think after they've gone to this new chassis, they've really ironed out a lot of the build quality issues. The keyboard deck has like very little flex, even when I press down really hard on it. They're definitely using magnesium directly under the keyboard deck for this entire area. They've, just made it easier to get into the laptop, and I will post some pictures of what it looks like underneath. But generally it's a really well built laptop, and for the price point it's really hard to argue because there are not many laptops built as well. I can easily hold the laptop in one hand and feel zero flex in the chassis as I hold it on one of the corners. So I'm really happy with the build quality. Now, if there's only one thing I would change about the build quality of ports, it was probably the addition of a full-size SD card slot on the side. But it's fine. No laptop is perfect, and this one comes pretty close for me, but that is one thing it does not have. Alright, let's talk about the AMD 6650U processor that is powering this laptop. I have to say, this thing is super energy efficient when you need it to be. And when you need it to also have power, it can really chug out a very serious amount of power. I can put up some Geekbench results and just other benchmarks just so that you guys get a pretty good idea of what that would look like. But this little laptop has a lot of power with the CPU, but even the new AMD Navi graphics on board, that's the main reason I really wanted this, because the Navi graphics on board are a big improvement over the Vega graphics of the last generation, and it basically rivals a lot of dedicated graphics for a lot of workstation GPUs, entry-level workstations. So you're getting the graphical performance of a lot of entry-level workstation graphics cards for not a whole lot of money, and that's very compelling. That's something really to think about, especially for something so thin and light. For me personally, 14-inch is the ideal. 15 is a little bit too big, so I think, relative to the size, the performance is just really solid. And if I was to step up to the 15.6 inch, yes, they would start, giving more options for discrete graphics, but I don't want the size and weight penalty. But if you don't mind the size and weight penalty, then by all means buy a bigger laptop, including something from the P series like the P16 or the P15. Either one has more power, but it's thicker. Another interesting difference between the AMD and Intel models is that for whatever reason, Lenovo decided to put two heat pipes on this laptop relative to the Intel model, which only has one heat pipe. And I think it might have to do something to do with the LPDDR5 RAM being soldered straight onto the motherboard next to the CPU. I think under full load, under full speed, it gets really hot. So that and the CPU together need to be cooled. But I will say, under full load, this laptop does put out quite a bit of heat, but at the same time, the fan noise is very, very low. It's actually really amazing how low it is. Alright, next up is battery life. And I have to say, for the 39.3 watt-hour battery that this has, it is actually a very small battery, all things considered. But I'm still able to get something like 7 hours of runtime on average on power saver mode, just doing menial tasks. If we got the 4-cell, 51.5 watt-hour battery, it would probably get up to 10 and a half hours. So I think in the future, I am probably going to manually upgrade to the larger battery by myself, because right now, it's just a piece of plastic with a honeycomb underneath, and it's okay. It saves a little bit of weight, but I think in the future, I want a little more battery, so I'm going to upgrade it myself. And usually on the lower spec versions of the T14, they don't give you the option to have that battery unless you do a custom build. Now, since the battery is not all that big, one consolation is that it charges really quickly. I can go pretty much from 0 to full charge within an hour, which is really quick. And I have to say that the included charging brick, this one, is actually really small compared to my last one, which was just enormous. It's got about an 8 to 10 foot cable, and it basically allows me to reach anywhere and charge from any location without any fuss, so I can't really complain. So between the battery life and the charging ability to get it charged up really quickly, I think it'll serve, most engineers and students just fine. You're not going to worry about battery all that much. One other thing to mention is that the speakers on this laptop are just really excellent for what they are. They just get ridiculously loud. They sound very good. So whatever Lenovo did to tune the Dolby audio on this, they did a really good job. And I really, really love the speakers. Now on top we have the webcam with the privacy shutter on right now. It's actually a new webcam, it's 1080p, which is becoming the standard for work from home. And I have to say that the quality is very solid. You won't look bad. The resolution is quite good, and you'll definitely look better in your presentation. So I think Lenovo did a good job, upgrading the webcam here for this new generation. Now we can move on to what is not so perfect about this laptop. I really, really like this laptop, but there are a couple of things that could be improved in the future. One thing is this soft touch finish. It feels amazing. It feels really amazing, but it does attract fingerprints quite easily, and I usually have to wipe it down every now and then. But I guess I could live with it long term. I can't really complain. And the other issue is that there is some sort of weird power saving wake from sleep issue. When I basically just close this laptop and just have it sit there for a while overnight, for some reason it is asleep, but it's also sipping battery. And then when I try to wake it up in the morning and I just open it up, it just won't wake up. And I've run into that a couple times. One time it was just because the battery ran out fully, but the other times was just because it was just simply unresponsive. So what I realized I had to do was set it so that if I need to close the lid or just press the power button, it put it into hibernate, and which is like a deeper sleep. And if I were to wake it up, it would take a little bit longer to wake up from hibernate, but it would wake up every time, which is not a workaround that I want to have to do, but I will do it because everything about this laptop, everything else works out so well for me. I hope Lenovo addresses this in a future firmware update, or AMD. The problem is happening on one of their ends, and I hope it gets resolved sooner than later. Alright, so overall I had to say that I would still keep the score for this laptop at a 9 out of 10. It's really good, but it's not perfect. Now, if someone has the budget, they should probably, go to a P series or consider an X1 Carbon if they want something more premium that has Intel. But I have to say that Intel lately, they're more powerful than AMD on their laptops, but it's at the compromise of power efficiency. So they usually have bigger batteries installed to compensate. And I prefer what AMD is doing for, power efficiency. Now, if you're like a student on a tighter budget, I can highly recommend that you get the Thinkpad E14 or the E15 or the L14 or L15. Those laptops will do a lot of what this guy can do, but at a cheaper price with some minor compromises perhaps in the screen department. But if you can't I spent about $1,000 for this one. It's normally around $1,200 to $1,300 thereabouts. If you can't afford to spend that, just go to the E series. And if you want something far more trendy and sleek looking and still be a ThinkPad, I would go to the new Z series, especially now that they also have, the AMD CPUs and one special AMD CPU specially made for that laptop. All right, now I'm going to address a couple of FAQs. One of them is, does this have replaceable or upgradable RAM? It does not. The AMD version comes with faster LPDDR5 RAM that's soldered right on, so that does not have upgradable RAM. But the Intel version, for whatever reason, has one RAM slot that is upgradable. So if you need to be able to upgrade your RAM, you should definitely go the Intel route for the T14. Another user asked me, is 16 gigs of RAM enough? And I think for my purposes, doing some lighter engineering tasks and some lighter video editing, yes, 16 gigabytes is absolutely enough today. Will it be tomorrow? It might be. I don't think most people right now need 32 gigabytes of RAM, but if you can afford it or if you just want the extra RAM, then just buy more RAM. But I would say 8 gigabytes at this point is cutting it a little too close, so I would recommend at least people get 16 gigs of RAM. Another viewer asked me if you can do any video editing on this, and the answer is definitely yes. I was able to load in one of my review videos into DaVinci Resolve on this laptop, and I was able to, decode the video pretty smoothly in real time, just scrub through the DaVinci timeline and also just really edit quite easily, and the export time was only 30 seconds slower than my desktop. So it's very capable. The integrated graphics in here really help it perform well, and also the CPU is high performing when you need it to be. Just be mindful that it will pump out quite a bit of heat. It's not as good on thermals as the MacBook Air is, but I don't push it to its limits quite like this often, and I still use my desktop for editing. Alright guys, that's the end of the video. Thank you guys for watching so much. I noticed a lot of you guys are international, and I really appreciate having such a wide international audience, and I love it. So guys, if you have any comments, questions, please put it in the comments below, and I'll try to get to every single one of them. Until next time, thanks.